Every time I think I'm done talking about Neil Gaiman, something pulls me back in. And this time is competing for the most exhausting reason I've ever had to discuss the man. Let's get right into this. On May 15th of this year, a YouTuber with the channel name Schmouter put out a video titled PI Investigates Neil Gaiman Substack Situation. The primary focus of that video is the debunking of the Substack technopathology, which has been attempting to build a extremely dubious case for Gaiman's innocence. It's something that was rightfully being ignored for a while until Gaiman himself, in his first public statement since crawling out of whatever slime pit he's been hiding in during nearly 2 years of allegations, shouted it out, which naturally drew more attention to it. And given that it was now being noticed, I'm actually glad somebody is debunking the thing, because it's terrible. I browsed it enough to get a sense of what it was doing back around January of this year, because the thing was getting spammed at me on Blue Sky by what I suspect was a sock puppet account of the creator of the cursed thing. But realistically, I was never going to comb through it. So my utter respect for anyone who had the stomach to actually do that. Hey, it's Vera from The Edit, and just a really quick note I want to drop in here. While I will reiterate that this is in no way intention to be a debunking of anything that Schmouter says about the technopathology Substack, I am also not co-signing it. That's not because I doubt the work, it's because when I went through his entire video, I wasn't paying that close attention to what he was saying about technopathology. I got the general gist of it. Broadly, tonally at least, I agree with what he was doing, but I didn't closely examine any of that stuff. I didn't compare it to what was in the actual blog, so I'm not going to personally vouch for it. I am 100% behind somebody debunking the thing. I am 100% behind somebody combing through it to figure out all the problems with it, and I am also 100% neutral on the output of Schmouter on this, simply because I wasn't paying as much attention to that when I went through his video. Cool? Cool. Moving on. And if going through and debunking that monster of a Substack was the only thing Schmouter did in this video, I wouldn't be talking about it right now. Heck, you know what? I'd probably happily promote his work if that's all the video was. Except he decided to mention me several times. And I'm going to address the things he said about me because they were, well, frankly, pretty wild mischaracterizations of what I have done and said regarding Neil Gaiman. Now, before I get into this, I just want to say, this is not my first rodeo. I've been flanderized before, I've been strawmanned before, I have been dealing with bad faith responses and mischaracterizations of my work since about 2018. Not constantly, I don't want to give you the wrong impression, but intermittently, it has always been happening. One time, it resulted in a months-long online harassment campaign against me across multiple platforms because my saying, "If you buy the Hogwarts Legacy game, you are contributing to transphobia. Even if you consider yourself an ally, even if you yourself are trans, you are contributing to transphobia." And that is not an opinion, it's a fact. J.K. Rowling, both through the words she says and direct financial contributions, is signal boosting and enabling multiple groups and individuals who are actively pushing for the stripping away and restricting of rights of trans people, especially in the UK right now. And it's working. If you pay for that game, you're contributing to that. Was then bastardized into, anyone who even plays this game is personally a transphobe. And I was then harassed on the basis of that mischaracterization of what I said, as opposed to, the thing I actually said. Did a whole video on it. It was a thing. It's just one of those things that's really just never stopped happening ever since the year I came out. I'm sure that's coincidental. But whether it's people mad about my thoughts on Doctor Who, on AI, the fact that YouTubers have far more control over the ads that run on their channels than they claim to or may indeed even realize, and of course, so many times when I have talked about trans issues. So as I said, not my first rodeo. And if you've been following me for a while, you actually may have noticed I generally don't respond to these. There's a number of reasons for that. There's the obvious reason, which is the whole Streisand effect thing, bringing more attention to it than it might otherwise have. And also, I honestly just don't want to start back and forth feuds because that becomes a never-ending drama cycle that I do not want any part of. Now, I may have summarized what happened to me with Hogwarts Legacy, but I never specifically called out any of the individual people lying, misrepresenting, or otherwise telling people to harass me over what I said. Up till now, the only time I've talked about a video somebody else made about me or referenced me was when Blair White came at me back in 2020. I responded to that. And that was because she had a monstrously larger platform than I did. And at that particular point in time, there was still some degree of crossover between some of my audience and her, since at that point she had not yet fully alienated herself from the entire queer community, though she was actively working on it and well on her way by that point. But that was why I addressed it then. But I haven't since. Now, I'm not going to go through this entire video that Schmouter made because, again, primarily, it is not about me. And to be clear, I am in no way debunking anything that this creator says about that Substack. Technopathology and everything it stands for. Also, don't harass this guy. I don't know him. I don't want personal beef with him. But he brought me up and my work a few times, and it's those parts and only those parts of this video that I'm going to be addressing. Now, I'm not limiting that way just because I am not trying to start beef with the guy, but the reason I'm addressing this at all is actually because it serves as kind of a crystallization of something I've actually been aware of going on for about a year and a half or so. Because while I don't interact much in discourse or fandom spaces, it doesn't mean I don't know what goes on in them. And I know that the things said about me in this video are things that are stated fairly regularly as fact in some of these spaces. So this is actually less about me responding to this one guy and more about me being fully aware what's been said about me and now having a single thing that I can point to and address in what is actually sort of a covering of a larger issue. Now, while my focus will be narrow, I did actually watch the guy's entire video. And I couldn't help but notice that while he would directly quote Gaiman and that Substack pretty frequently, he never directly quoted me. No clips, no transcribed quotes, nothing. Okay, actually, that's not strictly true. He used one clip out of context to clutch pearls about my use of a riding crop as a pointer, which, for the record, is a long-running visual gag in my videos. I'm starting to think maybe I should have gotten a proper pointer. You work with what you own. My point in all of this is that the things he says about me and my positions and my feelings and my statements about Gaiman aren't things he provides receipts for. He just says them. And again, it looks like he did provide receipts for everything he said about the Substack, so I'm only talking about what he said about me. And given that he didn't point to any specific statements I made, but still summarized my work this way,
it's just abundantly clear that Vera, the host, presenter, and I guess the lead only person of the channel as far as I know, she just doesn't believe the victims at all.
I need to ask, when did I actually defend Gaiman? I'm not asking that as a gotcha. I really mean it. At what point in any video I ever made did I call for dismissing the women's accounts or say that Gaiman didn't do anything or should be treated like he didn't do anything? The lack of clips of anything I ever said is actually kind of jarring to me, given that if I were going to try and mischaracterize my own video, I know exactly what clips I'd pull to use out of context. But actually, you know what? I'll circle back to that. A little bit of a separate thought. But stepping outside of this specific video for a moment, I am going to acknowledge that there is a fair version of what Schmouter is saying about me. And that would be asking the question of whether or not my pointing out the problems with the outlet Tortoise Media that initially broke the story about Gaiman, whether my criticisms of them and their reporting brings inherent and unavoidable doubt to the women's stories? And if so, should I just have not made the videos? Because I've seen the arguments made to support that position, that making my videos was a net negative. I don't agree with that conclusion, but I certainly don't begrudge the question, and I think it's honestly a fair one to ask. Now, my responses to that question are as follows. I very specifically say that I believe the women's accounts, but the reporting also sucks, and that in and of itself is a problem. I actually went on about it for a fair bit in that first video even. What I want more than anything, my major takeaway from this, is that these women's stories deserve to be handled by people who are better at this than tortoise media. Because if any of this is true, it deserved a proper platform from a trustworthy outlet and people who weren't going to do this with it. You owed these women better than what you produced. The reporting being and casting doubt on the accounts of these women's stories is not my fault. It's Tortoise Media's fault. I said as much at the time. These women deserve somebody to treat their stories well. They deserve better than these chuckle fucks. This feels very much like it is a shoot the messenger situation where the anger gets directed at the person pointing out the problem. So there are those who have argued that it was a poor call on my part to call out the bad presentation and bad reporting of Tortoise Media because it potentially weakened the acceptance of that first wave of accusations. And certainly at an emotional level, I can understand that fear, even if I don't agree with the conclusion that I shouldn't have said anything. Now, I mentioned before that I know what clips I would pull from my own video if I wanted to present it as if I was actually defending Gaiman. First one would be this. I understand Scarlett's frustration with the police, but I also understand why this wouldn't move forward. Because out of context, that could be read as me saying this didn't move forward with prosecution or even arrest of Gaiman because the police didn't think her story was credible. Now, the actual context for that clip is my acknowledging the legal reality of the difficulty of prosecuting these kinds of cases and not moving into charges against Gaiman only means that prosecutors were not confident in their ability to win, which is not the same thing as the accusations being untrue. I was addressing the legal reality of these kinds of cases. Another bit that somebody could grab would be this. She also never went to the police. She never filed a report. Again, you could take this as me dismissing somebody's claims because no police report was even filed. Full context on that would reveal that I'm pointing this out again to acknowledge that the specific claim I'm addressing in that moment is from 20 years ago, so time passed combined with a lack of initial police report would make it incredibly difficult for Gaiman to see legal consequences for what he was accused of. Not that I doubted the account. Here's a final bit that you could clip out. Communication is so important because if he thinks that a lack of a no is consent, then he honestly believes that what happened was all consensual. Now, that might look like I'm saying it's not his fault because he thought he had consent because he wasn't told no. Except in order to believe that about that clip, you'd have to ignore the fact that mere minutes before, I said this. It's not enough to say no means no. No, yes means yes. Nothing means yes other than yes. Just moving forward and waiting for a no is not consent. I'm bringing all this up even though Schmouter himself did not spot check any out of context clips like I kind of just did. I know that other people have. I've not been blind to what's been happening in the discourse over the last nearly 2 years. I am aware that there have been people who would cite my work as a reason that they were doubtful of the allegations or at least were hesitant and holding off any final judgment of how they felt about Gaiman based on my pointing out the problems with Tortoise Media's reporting. Now, how widespread that sentiment actually is or was is difficult to know. But I do know that it exists, and I really don't like that it exists. And I wasn't even blind to that possibility at the time I made the very first video, because near the end of that original video, I actually interrupted myself to address this very concern. Apologies on this one. This clip's a little bit on the longer side. I put a bit of emphasis there on talking about the quote-unquote best case scenario. And I know why I did it. I did it trying to make the point that even the most generous reading isn't good for Gaiman, at least certainly not good for the view I had of the man. And I think that's true of a lot of his fans as well. But I want to jump in here because I'm worried that the emphasis that I put on that might give the impression that I believe the best case scenario to be true. And the thing is, right now, I don't know what I believe because I don't trust the outlet. But what I will say is I find it incredibly unlikely that the best case scenario, as I laid it out in this video, is what actually happened. And as I note there, even if it is, that's still not good. And I don't like how I softened it so much, like there's still problems. Like, no, he did stuff wrong. Pretty much in every version of this, he did stuff wrong. The question is how many things. And I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted by this thing. And I just did not want to run the risk that people might think that I'm trying to push the idea that the best case scenario is what happened. Because I don't know what happened. But I think the chances that the most favorable towards Gaiman scenario is accurate, those chances are real slim. So even before that first video was put out, I was trying to minimize people misrepresenting my thoughts. And I will grant that if I were to go back in time and remake the video, I would put my pointing out that I believe these women's stories, but I don't trust the presentation much earlier and reiterate it more often than I did. That is one of the only things I'd change, though, because I stand by what I said about Tortoise Media, its reporters, and their work. But assuming that you aren't pulling clips out of context, that discussion about whether my pointing out Tortoise Media's problems helped Gaiman regardless of my intentions is, as I said, a fair enough conversation to have. But over time, it's gone from the question, did this hurt the perception of the allegations, to the statement, this did hurt the perception of the allegations, and that then transformed into, this was a defense of Gaiman, and that then led to, she never believed these women.
She just doesn't believe the victims at all.
We start from a fair question and end at a falsehood that then gets paraded around as fact by people who will never look at what I actually said because they've already had it summarized for them by people who probably also haven't seen what I actually said. They have heard it summarized inaccurately, but those hearing it won't know that unless they check, and few will. Thus it spreads and proliferates as if it is truth. You can actually see this in real time in the comment section of Schmouter's videos, because while there's a number of comments from folks who already came to this conclusion about me, you can see others hearing this for the first time and taking it as truth. This is the point where I am going to throw out what is admittedly something of an accusation. I don't think Schmouter actually watched my videos. Actually, you know what? Okay, to give some benefit of the doubt and a little bit of wiggle room on that, if he did watch my videos, I suspect he watched the first two at most and likely did so back around the time that they were first released. And while I am unconvinced that he actually watched my later work, I will acknowledge he is clearly at least aware of this video where I made it clear after the Vulture article came out that it was clear that basically the worst version of events was in fact true and that I would not be talking about any of the man's work ever again.
Even after the Lila Shapiro article dropped, she clearly came to accept that Gaiman was a sleazebag, but there was no mea culpa. There was no reckoning with the credibility of the victim's arguments, and also the fact that she had spent a lot of time and energy and platform power diminishing the accounts of the survivors.
But while Schmouter is clearly aware of this video, it's very clear from other things that he said that I will get into later that he views that as some sort of failed apology, which is not what the video was ever meant to be. Even if I'm wrong about the fact that he hasn't watched anything that I made past the first 2 videos, if not only the very first one, it's very clear that he's dug in on what he thinks I said or was doing in those first videos, and feels comfortable disregarding anything else I've ever said or done. So even if I'm wrong and he did see more of the work I did, he might as well not have for the way that he talks about me. I suspect he was active in the spaces where it is taken as read that I defended Gaiman and or attacked or discredited these women. And he adopted that position without ever going back to watch or rewatch my initial work or see any of the later stuff that I point out. And to be fair, I've done that kind of thing too. Sometimes you hear something repeated often enough, you either assume it's true or you fail to realize that you never actually double-checked that. I personally did this with the so-called Cartmel Master Plan when I talk about Doctor Who. It was something that I'd heard about so often, I just assumed that what I'd been hearing was true, only to then later find out that it was barely a thing at all and had since been greatly exaggerated in fan spaces. This sort of thing happens, and I do get that. However, even though I get how this sort of thing happens, I will point out that when I did it, it was about a bit of Doctor Who lore and not about an actual person's beliefs and statements. It's still something of a bold claim for me to say I don't think he watched my work. So here's what I'll offer. When he brings up my work, he shows this image of the playlist and discusses it as a series.
That gap allowed people who were already incentivized to disbelieve the survivors to gather ammunition and to really ingrain their bias in favor of Gaiman. There's no better example of this than the series by the Council of Geeks. I found these videos to be, frankly, pretty shocking.
Which certainly means he is at least presenting himself in a way that gives the impression of him having seen all of it, even if he doesn't explicitly say that. Right off the bat, I can't help but mention that the thumbnail that was the face of the playlist at the time he took that screenshot, that is a thumbnail sure doesn't look like something somebody who was defending Gaiman would use. That is admittedly kind of a minor, possibly even petty point, but at the time Schmouter took that screenshot, I actually accidentally had the wrong video at the front of the playlist. So if he'd watched the playlist in the order that it was at the time he took that screenshot, the first video he would have seen wasn't the first one I made, it would have been what was actually the 5th. And in that video, after a little bit of preamble, I say this just at over the 1 minute mark. I need to expand my imagination when it comes to just how awful the worst of us can be. On that note, let's talk about Neil Gaiman. I've since fixed the video order on that playlist, so it's actually chronological now. So, I don't know, I guess I'll say thanks to Schmouter for helping me realize I had the videos ordered wrong on that playlist. Anyway, the more important thing here is that, as you can see with the screenshot that he's showing, there are 6 videos. He could have shown individual thumbnails, but he shows this for the playlist, which visually presents the implication that he saw all 6. Now, I say all that because one of the things he says is this.
Technopathology links to the Council of Geeks video in this article, which would be mortifying if that were me.
Yeah, I was mortified. Or, I guess, more accurately, I was livid, which you would know if you watched the 6th video on that playlist, because it was a short I made months ago when Gaiman first made his initial public statement and referenced technopathology. And in that short, I have no kind words for that Substack, and I very specifically bring up that they referenced my work, and I said this. Quick thing for you folks, don't reference my work. I know I question Tortoise Media's priorities and their ability to relay any of this information. I stand by everything I said. But you know what I never did? I never brought any doubt to the stories of the women who came forward. Not once did I do that. So you keep my name out of your fucking mouth. So for you to say, I'd be mortified in a tone that implies I've not said anything about these jackasses referencing me already seems generously like you never saw that short.
Which would be mortifying if that were me.
And the overall impression that I had is that you didn't see past the first two videos, and I honestly suspect probably not past the first. And again, I don't think you refreshed yourself on it. But you definitely didn't watch everything, because if you watch my entire series of videos, that means that you heard me say all of the following. For the sake of brevity, I'm not going to include any of the clips I've already shown you that go against the narrative Schmouter is saying about me. So everything you see from here is on top of what I've already shown you. The point of my going into this, to the level of detail that I am, is not to poke holes or bring doubt to Scarlett's story. And they're not wrong when they say that these women's stories have a reason to be told, and there is a reason to bring the story forward. That's true. Boy, do I wish it had been done by somebody who's good at this, and I keep saying it, but it makes me not want to trust this outlet. I feel like I can't, frankly. And that is 100% independent of the accusations. I think they're good at investigation. I think they suck at actually reporting. I do want to emphasize that the previous women speaking under a sense of pseudo-anonymity, again, does not negate their stories, but it does say something about the strength of someone's convictions that they put their first and last name out there to potentially be harassed and pilloried by people who either want to defend Gaiman in specific or who enjoy going after women who say bad things about powerful men. The fact that she was paid money for some people will be used against her, which I think, especially in this particular case, is unfair. I hate this podcast so goddamn much. How bad they are at what they do. And how much they personally piss me off. Doesn't negate the pattern that we're seeing. And at this point, it is a pattern. We have enough stories from enough people that unless you are going to spin some massive conspiracy of women across the globe with a massive stretch in age range ranging from their 20s through their 60s, all secretly colluding to take down this one man, unless you're going to spin that sort of conspiracy narrative, and if you're going to, please go do it somewhere else. Unless you're going to do that, I don't think that you can claim that there's no fire behind the smoke. I believe these women, and while I question the integrity of Tortoise Media, and I stand by that questioning, I have never questioned the accounts the victims gave, and I do not question the integrity of the Vulture article. The man is a monster, and he is not welcome here. Reminder, the allegations against him are pretty much all sexual in nature and range from him disregarding consent, failing to get proper consent, failing to take note of the power imbalance in situations that he was in, and in some cases, basically sexual assault and rape. So, yeah, wonderful spectrum of behavior that he has been denying, but we are up to, at my last count, 9 different women who have accused him, and they have stories that are consistent with each other, and it is spread across decades worth of time. So he's been doing this for a while. The initial story was broken by Tortoise Media, who I have a whole lot of problems with the way that they covered this story. I don't disbelieve any of their reporting, and I don't think they reported anything that was a falsehood, or at least knowingly so. I just think they're a really sleazy organization, and they undermine these women's stories with the way that they presented this stuff. He's not suing her for defamation. If he was going after any of these people for defamation, it would still be a bullying tactic, but that would be something he could theoretically go after all these women for if he's claiming that what they are saying is untrue. But he's not. He is going after the one who signed a very specific and probably actually enforceable NDA, and he is just trying to claw money back that, unless he has completely botched his finances, he doesn't need. So he's just being cruel and petty. This is him being the bad guy. This is him being the bully. The man doesn't care anymore. He wants to hurt her. And that is very much in keeping with the image that is becoming clear about this man. That's what he does. He hurts people. And if you watched all of it, that means that after hearing that, you felt it was accurate to claim that I didn't believe the stories of these women at all.
She just doesn't believe the victims at all.
So I'm actually giving you benefit of the doubt when I say I don't think you watched most of my work, if any. I am leaning towards the reading that says you ran with an assumption rather than the one that says you saw all my work and claimed I said the literal opposite of what I said. And even if you feel you can defend your interpretation of my views from, say, that very first video, the one where I practically pleaded for a better news organization to look into this, these women's stories deserve to be handled by people who are better at this than tortoise media. Even if you think your read on that is accurate and defensible, I would then ask why you feel it's fair to present that interpretation of my first video as if it's my current opinion, with only the barest minimum acknowledgement of what I said after the Vulture article came out that you present dismissively and never bring up again.
Even after the Lila Shapiro article dropped, she clearly came to accept that Gaiman was a sleazebag, but there was no mea culpa.
Because yes, my opinion did shift after that Vulture article. But it didn't, as some will claim, shift from I don't believe these women to, well, now I do. It shifted from I have a hard time being certain about exactly how bad this is because the reporting sucks, but it is also definitely bad. It shifted from that to I will never discuss this man's body of work or things adapted from it ever again because it's clear now what kind of man he is. If you only ever watched the first video, I hadn't yet made up my mind specifically about whether I was going to engage with Good Omens 3. But I certainly did make up my mind since, especially after the Vulture article came out. And going forward, it is my intention to not discuss his works or adaptations of his works on this or any other channel. And that was over a year ago. I said I wouldn't discuss his work, and I haven't. I didn't talk about Sandman Season 2. I didn't talk about Good Omens 3. I didn't do trailer reactions for either of those. I didn't post about them on Blue Sky. Nothing. I cut that man and his work from my life, as I said I would. So it's difficult to hear my name and my work, and me as a human being, all thrown under the umbrella of defended Gaiman didn't believe the stories of his victims. And on a personal note, possibly the single most infuriating thing I had to hear you say was this.
Technopathology then makes a very similar argument to Vera of Council of Geeks, which is that the Master podcast is terrible, which I agree. And by extension, they believe that the victims' accounts lack credibility, which I disagree.
The conclusion that you are putting forward is literally the conclusion I reached at the end of that very first video. My major takeaway from this is that these women's stories deserve to be handled by people who are better at this than tortoise media. You owed these women better than what you produced. And you present it like it's your own conclusion and that it is somehow in opposition of mine.
the Master podcast is terrible, which I agree. And by extension, they believe that the victims' accounts lack credibility, which I disagree.
I took no pleasure in making those Gaiman videos, and there is a single-digit number of things I would probably do differently if I was making them today. But I stand by what I said at the time I said it, and I don't appreciate it when people, with ever-increasing amounts of hindsight, look at my work, that first video especially, and then speak as if I was acting out of malice or in any way in defense of that man. Because, sure, if you want to act like the only video I ever made was the first one, and you apply the level of certainty that we now know about Gaiman's monstrousness to your hindsight, and you then squint, maybe you can see that video as being soft on the topic. But there's a reason that if people who claim I doubted these women's stories bother to cite anything at all, it's pretty much only ever that first video. And if you think I should say that I was wrong and delist or delete the video, which is pretty much explicitly what Schmouter says I should have done when he's talked about this in places like Reddit, I'm not going to do that. If I'd said what people like Schmouter claim I said, then yeah, I would have made an I was wrong about Gaiman video ages ago. But I haven't, and I won't, because I wasn't. I didn't say I think he's innocent. I didn't say I don't believe these women. I said these women deserve somebody to treat their stories well. They deserve better than these chuckle fucks. And I was right. And I have no clue if Schmouter will see this. Ultimately, I don't really care if he does. I'm not asking for an apology or response. If he wants to give one, that is his business. But I've been watching for nearly 2 years as the work I did has been twisted, bastardized, shorthanded, mischaracterized, and or thrown out and ignored in order to focus on a few specific things that people want to criticize. And I've seen the resulting belief about what I did spread, and I am very, very exhausted by it. And I've not said anything about it before because up until this point, it's been Reddit threads and posts on Blue Sky or Tumblr and places I otherwise have no business showing up. But now this narrative about me and my work has spread to YouTube in a video that I hope is otherwise extremely good and well researched. Because just to reiterate what I said at the start, that Substack deserves to be torn apart. And I hope he did as thorough a job doing that part of his video as it seemed like when I went through the thing. But I'm not going to stand by while a video gaining traction on the platform I call home casually lumps me in with the fuckheads who made that Substack. To bring up that one clip he actually used of me, let's be fair and give more context to when he brought it up, because I don't want you to think I'm doing to him what I have said that folks have done to me. He didn't strictly take offense to the writing crop in and of itself. He does misidentify it as a flogger, but that ultimately doesn't really matter.
And which is this, a standard clause or a secret gagging order?
First of all, that is a grotesque title, given that some of Scarlett's accusations entail violent gagging. That's like when Fear from Council of Geeks used a fucking flogger as a prop in her Neil Gaiman video. What is wrong with you people?
He is implying a degree of callousness or tastelessness, or that any use of signifiers of kink in the video due to Gaiman using kink play to cover his actions is just gross. This is a take on that particular moment, I will admit, I haven't heard before. And to keep the full context train going, that moment, which he showed a brief clip of, was meant as a moment of levity in a video that was otherwise depressing to research, depressing to write, depressing to film, depressing to edit, and depressing to watch.
This is not to suggest any link between David Gaiman's alleged misconduct and his son's alleged misconduct. It's not to say like father, like son.
I took the opportunity presented by the single most absurd statement made in the entirety of the podcast, in my opinion, a statement which in no way involves the accounts of any women, any survivors, or any victims, and I tried to insert just a tiny bit of fun into that moment because of how stupid it was. And if it's an attempt at levity that didn't land for you, fair enough, I guess, but you bring it up in direct comparison with the technopathology Substack, and you ask,
what is wrong with you people?
As if the people who made that blog and I are cut from the same cloth, if not functionally one and the same. And regardless of whether you think I erred in making those videos, I don't think I'm out of line at taking pretty significant offense at being placed alongside conspiratorially minded fuckwits running interference for a monster and then having somebody gesture at me and them like we're the same. You people. Yeah, that, I won't lie, that ticked me off. It's also not worth raising my voice over. This made me come close to raising my voice, though, because apparently Schmouter's been promoting the video on Reddit, where he was called out for his portrayal of me. I'm just gonna note right now that I did not ask Jessie to jump in and do this. And actually, she's gonna confirm that for me. Isn't that right, Jessie?
Yes, I can 100% confirm that Vera did not ask me to post that on Reddit. I was doing it totally of my own volition.
His reply to being called out was to mildly soften his stance, but still claim that, quote,
even in their final video, she decry Gaiman, then posit best-case scenarios that involve the victims lying about significant pieces of evidence. She frequently treated the notion that Scarlett was outright lying as being plausible despite the credibility of her account.
Okay. I sort of alluded to this before, but now I'm going to say it outright. Schmouter, if you are watching, please comment or message me with which videos I said those things and with time codes, because I could play the entire best case scenario bits in the videos where that phrase showed up. For the record, the videos in which I spent any notable amount of time talking about best case scenarios was in the first two videos, and definitely not in the, quote, last video, which, as already established, was the short you clearly never saw. And at least as of the day before this video goes out, you still haven't seen it, going by the replies you're making to comments on your own video, despite the fact that people drew your attention to its existence in replies on the Reddit thread you started. At no point did I even imply the victims were lying, and the best case scenario, as I laid it out, was actually to make the point that even in the most generous possible reading, aka the best case scenario, which I took time out of that very first video to say I didn't think was likely, as you've already seen, but I was pointing out that even in the best case scenario, with the most generous interpretation of the evidence that was available at the time, Gaiman was still clearly at some degree of fault and had caused harm. Even stacking the deck in his favor as much as is possible, there's still issues here. So please, find me where I ever posited that a victim was lying or treated the notion that Scarlett was outright lying as being plausible. And if you show up with time codes, I bet I know what one you're going to throw out there, because I've been saving this one. But again, it's worth stressing, this is not strictly a one-person story versus another. The most tangible thing we have are the WhatsApp messages, and those do lean in Gaiman's favor. Even the Tortoise Media podcast said that what was present in the WhatsApp messages seemed to lean more towards Gaiman's version of events, which at that point in time did not include him accusing her of outright lying. I don't feel it was inaccurate or unfair for me to point out that at that point in time, the WhatsApp messages, and only the WhatsApp messages, did lean in Gaiman's favor in terms of the events that happened and his version of them, strictly because of the tone that she took in her replies. However, elsewhere in the video, I point out that that tone is not necessarily representative of how she actually felt about anything that went on. That being the case does not mean that Scarlett is being dishonest, and it doesn't mean that what she says happened didn't happen. And I also point out that even if it was consensual, it is fundamentally unethical because of the power imbalance of him being her literal employer. That is an irreconcilable power gap between an employer and an employee. Everything that you point out about this stuff, I also pointed out in the video that you are using to say that I didn't believe these women and called them liars. But again, sure, strip out the context of everything else I ever said elsewhere in the video, and this looks bad for me. Here is the one thing that I will grant shouldn't have been in there. Assuming all the reporting in this is accurate, I'll come back to that again in a second. That little moment where I said, I'll get back to that in a minute. That shouldn't have been there for logistical reasons. Because almost immediately after saying that, I interrupt my own video with a piece that I have already shown. And because of where I then jumped to coming out of that interruption part of the edit, I didn't actually circle back to what I meant when I said, we'll come back to that. And my aggravated tone was about my frustration with Tortoise as an outlet. Not that I thought they were lying or saying untruths about what these women were presenting. But yes, that small moment doesn't belong there because it references something I never come back to, and because I don't come back to it, taken within the lacking context that the video had, you can argue that it sounds like I am disparaging the entire content of the podcast, not just the presentation of it. Assuming all the reporting in this is accurate, I'll come back to that again in a second. And I said had in the past tense because I have now used YouTube's video editing backend to snip out that little bit, because that shouldn't have been there. Not because what I said was wrong, but because it was a cut-off thought and the context that would have clarified why I said that was not present. Therefore, that bit is completely vestigial and also potentially misleading, lacking the context that was later supposed to be given to it. That's my mistake. I'll own that. It's gone now. If you've made it to the end, thank you for that. Even if the folks watching somehow think that I am, in fact, what people like Schmouter say that I am, if you made it this far, at least you heard me out, and I suppose that's all I can reasonably ask for. If you don't think I'm that person and you're at all interested in supporting what I do, you'll notice I am virtually never sponsored on this channel. I've talked about why, and I won't diverge on it now, but I am supported by you folks. Patreon and YouTube memberships are what enable me to do this as my living. And while this particular video wasn't especially fun, I always appreciate the support and the help that I get in any amount. Every little bit helps. And I can't thank you folks enough. But even if you can't support me that way, the usual, the YouTube stuff, you know, the YouTube stuff, likes, shares, subscribes, it all helps. But what I want you to remember, no matter who you are, if you are watching this, and that includes Schmouter, you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. Unless you're the technopathology blog people, you folks can fuck off. But as for the rest of you, you are the council, and I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Zubin Lutfula, Auntie Kate 808, Mira G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Snark Shark, Oliver B, Mystic Shadow, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Becky Sparks, Twylord, Tracy Scrabbit, Paul Barabajoggle, Magdalena, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. Additionally, to thank some folks from the lower tiers of support, Lee and Andy, Gavin Hinden, and I Am Orcus. We have some new friends. We have Peppercorn and... where'd the other one go? Where'd you go? Coriander has gone behind my head. They are very young and they haven't been integrated with the other rats yet, but soon. Okay, yes. Maybe you weren't quite camera ready.